This is not just a prison story. This is a real place where silence destroyed lives. If you want true American crime stories they never taught in school, subscribe now and stay with us until the end. The man collapsed without a sound. His knees hit the cold stone floor first, then his body followed. Not because he was allowed to cry out, not because he chose silence, but because inside Sing Sing prison, sound itself was a crime. The guard did not rush to help him. No one did. The other inmates stood perfectly still, eyes forward, hands at their sides. Chains rested heavy on their ankles. Their mouths were closed tight. Even breathing too loudly could bring punishment. The man on the floor had broken one rule. He spoke, just one word, a whisper, a mistake. The guard raised his baton slowly, calmly, as if this were routine, because here it was. The baton came down once, twice. Still, no one screamed. Not the man being beaten, not the men forced to watch. Silence ruled Sing Sing more completely than iron bars or locked doors ever could. And this moment, hidden behind the gray walls overlooking the Hudson River, was not rare. It was normal. But how did a prison become a place where silence was more feared than pain? And how did thousands of men enter Sing Sing, believing they could survive, only to leave broken, mad, or not leave at all? That answer begins years earlier, long before that man collapsed, long before the rule of silence crushed voices into nothing, and long before Sing Sing earned its name as America's quietest hell. The prison stood tall above the Hudson River in New York. Its stone walls were built by prisoners themselves, massive blocks of gray rock, cut, lifted, and stacked by men already sentenced to suffer. By the 1870s, Sing Sing was one of the most feared prisons in the United States, not because it was loud, but because it was not. Sing Sing followed what was called the Auburn System. The idea was simple and cruel. Prisoners would work together during the day, but never speak. At night, they were locked alone in small cells, cut off from every other human being. Wardens believed silence would force inmates to think about their crimes. They believed isolation would lead to regret. They believed pain could fix people. They were wrong. By the 1870s, Sing Sing held over 1,000 inmates. Most were poor, many were immigrants, some were barely adults, a few were hardened criminals. But once inside, all were treated the same. Heads down, eyes forward, mouths shut. Inmates woke before sunrise. A bell rang through the prison. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to signal that another day of labor was about to begin. Men rose from narrow cells, barely wide enough to stretch their arms. The air was damp. The walls were cold year-round. Many cells had no heat in winter and little air in summer. Breakfast was eaten in silence. Work followed. Prisoners marched in straight lines, chains clanking softly. They worked in workshops, breaking stone, shaping wood, making shoes, barrels, furniture. Sing Sing was not just a prison, it was a factory. Every movement was watched. Every glance was judged. Every sound was a risk. A cough at the wrong moment could earn a beating. A look toward another man could mean days in isolation. A whispered prayer could land someone in the punishment cell. And the punishment cell was feared more than anything. It was dark, smaller than a normal cell, often without light, sometimes without food. Men were left there alone for days, sometimes weeks. Many did not come out the same. Some came out shaking. Some came out silent forever. Some came out screaming. Guards were given full control. There were rules, but enforcement depended on the man holding the baton.
Some guards enjoyed the power, others simply followed orders. Either way, the result was the same. Pain was constant. Silence was absolute. One former inmate later said Sing Sing did not punish the body first. It punished the mind. Men began to forget how to speak. They forgot how to make choices. They forgot who they were before the prison. Letters from home were limited. Visits were rare. Eye contact was forbidden. Even facial expressions could be punished. A smile could be seen as defiance.
A tear could be seen as weakness. Weakness was not tolerated. Executions also took place at Sing Sing. By the 1870s, the prison was becoming known as a place where the state carried out death sentences quietly, behind walls, away from the public eye. No crowds, no speeches, just a man, a sentence, and a door that closed forever. But death was not the worst fate at Sing Sing. Living there was. Doctors began noticing strange patterns. Men who entered healthy began acting confused. Some stopped speaking even when allowed. Some rocked back and forth in their cells. Some stared at walls for hours. Guards called them broken. Wardens called it reform. The state called it success. Yet inside, the prison was rotten from the inside out. By the mid-1870s, whispers began spreading beyond the walls. Journalists heard rumors. Former inmates spoke cautiously. Doctors raised concerns. Could silence really fix a man? Or was Sing Sing creating something worse? Then, one winter night, something happened that could not be hidden. An inmate refused to stand. The bell rang. The line formed. Every man took his place, except one. He stayed seated on his bunk. Guards shouted orders. He did not move. They approached him. He looked up. His eyes were empty. His lips did not move. He had been silent for so long that no one knew if he still remembered how to speak. The guards grabbed him, and that moment would change Sing Sing forever, because what happened next would force the prison into the public eye and expose the true cost of silence. But first, the prison would try to bury it, and the man who refused to stand would pay the price. They dragged him down the corridor with his feet barely touching the floor. The man did not fight. He did not shout. He did not beg. He did nothing. His head hung forward as guards pulled him past rows of silent inmates who stood frozen like statues. Chains rattled softly. A baton scraped against stone. No one was allowed to look, but everyone felt it. This was what happened when silence stopped working. The guards hauled him into the punishment cell. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed him whole. No light, no sound, no sense of time. This cell was not meant to correct behavior. It was meant to erase it. For 3 days, the man was left alone. No food the first day, a piece of bread the second. Water poured through a slot like an afterthought. No doctor came. No chaplain asked questions. When the door finally opened, the guards expected fear. What they saw instead unsettled them. The man smiled. Not a wide smile, not a happy one, just a slow, quiet curve of the mouth, as if something inside of him had snapped and fallen into place. He stepped out without help. He stood straight. He looked directly at the guard. That alone broke the rules. The guard struck him. The man did not flinch. Word spread quickly inside Sing Sing, not through speech, through looks, through posture, through something unspoken that passed from man to man. The silence was failing. By the 1870s, Sing Sing was under pressure. Outside its walls, America was changing. Newspapers were printing stories that shocked the public. People were starting to question old systems. Inside the prison, however, time stood still. Wardens still believed silence could save souls. Guards still believed fear kept order. Lawmakers still believed prisoners did not deserve comfort.
But something was happening that could not be ignored. Men were losing their minds. Doctors who visited Sing Sing began writing reports. They used careful words: mental strain, nervous collapse, emotional withdrawal. The truth was simpler. The prison was breaking people. Inmates who arrived talking normally began to stutter. Others whispered to walls. Some stopped responding to their names. A few tore their clothes apart or refused to eat. Suicide attempts rose. Punishments increased. The answer to suffering was always more suffering. Isolation cells were used more often. Whippings continued behind closed doors. Guards were rarely punished for excessive force. One former guard later admitted that silence made cruelty easy. When no one speaks, no one reports. When no one hears screams, pain becomes invisible. Sing Sing's location made this worse. Sitting along the Hudson River, far from most cities, the prison felt removed from the world. What happened inside stayed inside, until it didn't. In 1874, a former inmate was released after serving a long sentence. He returned to New York City thinner, older, and quieter than the man who entered. At first, he said nothing. Then one night, after too much drink, the words spilled out. He described the silence, the beatings, the punishment cell, the men who forgot how to speak. People listened. A reporter listened. Within weeks, newspapers began printing short pieces. Not accusations, just questions. Is silence humane? Is isolation reform or torture?
Does Sing Sing create criminals instead of fixing them? The prison denied everything. The warden claimed discipline was necessary. He said inmates exaggerated. He said Sing Sing followed the law. But inside the walls, guards were becoming nervous. Orders became stricter. Silence was enforced harder. Punishments became faster and harsher. Fear rose on both sides. Then came the death. An inmate collapsed during labor in the stone yard. He had complained of dizziness for days. Guards accused him of faking. He was ordered to continue working. He fell again. This time, he did not get up. The prison doctor arrived too late. The man was dead. Official cause was exhaustion. Unofficial truth spread quickly. He had been worked until his body quit. The man from the punishment cell saw the body carried away. His smile disappeared. Something else took its place. Anger. That night, for the first time in years, a sound echoed through Sing Sing after lights out. A laugh. Low, broken, uncontrolled. Guards rushed the cell block. They demanded silence. They threatened punishment. The laughter stopped, but it had already done damage. Once silence cracks, it can never be whole again. Over the next weeks, small acts of defiance appeared. A man dropped a tool on purpose. Another held eye contact for a second too long. Someone hummed during work. Punishments followed. Beatings, isolation, reduced food. But the fear was changing sides. Guards began sleeping with weapons closer. Wardens doubled patrols. The prison felt tense, like a storm waiting to break. Outside, pressure grew louder. A state official requested an inspection. Not a full investigation, just a visit. The warden cleaned the prison. Cells were scrubbed. Inmates were warned. Guards were told to behave. On inspection day, everything looked orderly, quiet, controlled, too controlled. One inspector noticed something strange. No one spoke, not even when allowed. He asked a prisoner a simple question. The man opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His lips moved. No sound followed. The inspector frowned. That moment could not be undone. The report that followed did not accuse Sing Sing of crimes.
it did something worse. It doubted its methods. Lawmakers argued, prison officials defended tradition, reformers demanded change. Inside Sing Sing, rumors spread that silence might end. Some inmates felt hope, others felt fear, because when silence is all you know, even freedom feels dangerous. The man from the punishment cell was called to the warden's office. He had not spoken in months. His eyes were sharp, his body tense. The warden told him the rules might change. The man tried to speak. His voice cracked. The sound shocked everyone in the room. The warden leaned forward. And that is when the man finally said what silence had been hiding. What he said would put Sing Sing in the center of a national storm. And once spoken, it could never be taken back. The room went completely still. The warden leaned closer, as if afraid the sound might vanish again. Guards shifted their weight. The man stood in front of them, hands shaking, mouth open, eyes wet. Then he spoke. Not loudly, not clearly, but he spoke. "I forgot my name." The words hit harder than any scream ever could. No threats, no accusations, just a broken truth. The man explained slowly, stopping often, as if pulling each word from deep water. He said the silence had erased him. Days blended into nights. Thoughts had nowhere to go. He said he remembered his crime, but not his childhood. He remembered pain, but not faces. He remembered rules, but not reasons. He said Sing Sing had not reformed him. It had emptied him. The warden ended the meeting quickly. Guards escorted the man out. Orders were given. Reports were written. The prison returned to routine. But something had already changed, because the sound of a prisoner's voice, cracked and trembling, had crossed a line Sing Sing could never uncross. Word spread outside the prison walls, slowly at first, then faster. Newspapers printed stories about inmates who forgot how to speak. Doctors spoke openly about mental collapse caused by isolation. Religious leaders questioned whether silence was punishment or cruelty. The state could no longer ignore it. In 1876, Sing Sing came under formal review. Officials toured the prison, asking questions guards did not want to answer. Inmates were spoken to directly. Some still could not respond. Others cried. Some laughed. None seemed normal. Reports described men who flinched at sound, men who whispered even when told they could speak, men who stared at the floor as if the walls were listening. The Auburn System, once praised as modern and moral, now looked dangerous. Guards defended themselves. They said inmates were criminals. They said kindness led to chaos. They said silence kept order. But evidence kept piling up. Records showed rising deaths, rising illness, rising insanity. And behind every number was a man who entered Sing Sing whole and left shattered. Executions continued during this time, quiet, controlled, official. The state insisted death sentences proved the prison worked, that justice was being served. But reformers asked a question no one wanted to answer. If Sing Sing destroyed minds, how many executed men were already broken before they died? Inside the prison, tension grew worse. Some guards softened, others grew crueler. Punishments became unpredictable. One day a glance was ignored. The next day it meant isolation. Fear ruled everyone. The man who forgot his name was returned to his cell. Other inmates looked at him differently now, not as a risk, not as a rule breaker, but as proof.
Proof that silence could erase a man. One night, during late work detail, a new inmate whispered a question to him. "What's your name?" The man froze. He searched his memory. nothing came. "I don't know," he whispered back. The new inmate stared at him in horror. That moment spread faster than any spoken rumor ever could. Silence was no longer control, it was contagion. By the late 1870s, changes began. Small ones, carefully tested ones. Inmates were allowed limited speech during work. Guards were told to reduce isolation. Doctors were given more authority. Not because the state suddenly cared, but because the prison was becoming a public embarrassment. Sing Sing did not collapse, it did not close. It adapted just enough to survive. The Auburn System faded slowly, not declared evil, just outdated. Many inmates never recovered. Those who had spent years in silence carried it with them forever. Some struggled to speak normally. Some avoided people. Some returned to prison because the outside world felt too loud. Sing Sing had trained them for quiet suffering, not freedom. The man who forgot his name was eventually released. Records show he left the prison thin, gray, and withdrawn. There is no record of his life afterward. No job listed, no family traced, no grave marked. Only a note in a prison ledger. Mentally unfit at release. Sing Sing continued into the future, becoming even more famous in later years. But its reputation was already sealed in the 1870s. It was the place where America learned a hard truth. You can cage a body, but when you cage a voice long enough, you destroy the person inside. And the silence that follows is not peace, it is damage. Sing Sing Prison in the 1870s was not just a prison, it was an experiment, and the inmates were the cost. The first sound many former inmates remembered after release was not a voice, it was noise. Street carts rattling, children shouting, doors slamming, horses moving too fast, too loud. Men who had survived Sing Sing in the 1870s stepped back into the world and felt attacked by it. Sounds came from every direction at once. There were no rules telling them when to speak or where to stand, no bells, no commands. Freedom felt like chaos. Some men covered their ears, others froze in place. A few turned around and walked straight back to the prison gates, begging to return. The outside world was louder than their minds could handle. Doctors later called this damage. Back then, it was called weakness. Newspapers continued reporting on Sing Sing. Reformers visited other prisons and found similar silence rules being used across the country. Auburn, Elmira, state prisons in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Sing Sing was not alone. It had gone the furthest. The state made changes slowly, very slowly. Silence rules were softened. Isolation cells were reduced. Guards were told to rely less on beatings. But there was no apology, no public admission that the system had failed, and no help for the men already broken. Former inmates struggled to find work. Many could not speak confidently. Some avoided eye contact. Others jumped at sudden sounds. Employers saw them as unstable, dangerous. Several were arrested again within months, not because they were criminals, but because prison had trained them only to survive prison. One former inmate wrote a letter years later. It was short, uneven, hard to read. He said Sing Sing taught him how to obey, but not how to live. He said silence followed him everywhere. At night, he still heard the bell.
Sing Sing continued operating, but its reputation never fully recovered.
The prison became a symbol used in debates about punishment and reform. Lawmakers pointed to it as both a warning and a model, depending on their beliefs. Some argued criminals deserved suffering. Others argued suffering created more crime. The men caught in the middle had no voice. Many never learned how to use it again. Records from the late 1870s show a rise in prisoners labeled insane upon release. This was new. Before strict silence systems, this number had been far lower. The pattern was clear, even if officials refused to say it out loud. Silence damaged minds. Isolation erased identity. Pain did not fix behavior. Yet prisons across America kept using these methods for decades. Why? Because silence was cheap. Because fear was easy. Because broken men could not complain. Sing Sing had proven that control could be absolute if voices were removed. That lesson spread faster than reform ever did. The man who forgot his name was not the only one. He was simply the first to be heard. Most were never heard at all. Their stories ended quietly, in workhouses, in poor homes, in early graves. Their prison numbers survived longer than their memories. Sing Sing stood on the Hudson River, unchanged in stone, but stained by what happened inside. Tourists passed by on boats. The walls looked strong, impressive. No one could hear the silence trapped inside them. By the end of the 1870s, America stood at a crossroads. It could choose punishment or understanding, control or repair, silence or truth. It chose both. Reforms came, but slowly. Damage continued, but quietly. Prisons evolved, but never fully escaped the shadow of Sing Sing. Even today, when people speak the name, they lower their voice. Because somewhere deep in American history, there is a memory of a place where silence ruled and men disappeared without dying. Sing Sing prison in the 1870s was real. The suffering was real. And the lesson was learned too late for the men who paid for it. What you heard was real, and it happened in America. Stories like this were buried, not erased. If you want more true prison crime and forgotten history, subscribe now and keep these stories alive.